Hello, my name is Leo, and welcome to a new tutorial by Blauw Films. Today we're going to be looking at Thinker from Thinker and Receiver from our upcoming film Syntactic Labyrinths. These two have been designed by Edon Guraziu, whose work you might be familiar with from either I Am Mother or a bunch of other really cool stuff. I'll leave his art station below so you can check it out. In Syntactic Labyrinths, Thinker is set inside of this library. It's a spaceship that we have built as a real set, thanks to Teresa Almeida. And this is like super cool, especially because we got some footage, we got some real backplates here shot by Tomás Posada, and then we're gonna be integrating the CG model on top of it. If I go to my After Effects over here, you can see I have kinda roughly painted out the tracking marker object we had placed right there. And then the only next thing we have to do is inside of Cinema 4D, just realign the footage somewhat to the position that we want it to be. This render over here, for those who are familiar with the channel or Blauw Films in general, I think this is the first test render we did about a year ago. I'm just going to be putting that as a foreground object inside of Cinema 4D, and then we're going to be matching this up, adding the textures, making that look good, rendering it out with the correct passes, and then compositing it inside of After Effects. Before we start with the tutorial, you know the deal. Come to our ArtStation store, links in the description below. The planet Earth seems to sell a lot, but nobody seems to really look at the other planets. So we have the Jupiter assets, we have Mars over here, which you can like do a lot of crazy stuff with. Decals, moon assets, this one's free, go get it. 100 organic star fields. We're actually going to be using this in a few of the tutorials related to this, but not this one today. And overcast clouds and raw clouds, the OG Blauw Films assets. Cool, let's get into it. So the first thing I would like to do is I would just like to make a little bit of a comparison between our scene and the scene we're trying to put this into. The first thing I'm seeing is that our lens is not completely correct. So we did take measurements of the set, but I don't think this is gonna be it. I'm gonna go for a 35. There you go. It's a pretty solid match, but not really. Like, at least the sides are matching, but then the inside back facet is not really matching. Let's see, what do I feel? Alright, I'm gonna take Thinker and I'm gonna move the object a bit further to the front. This way I'm just giving it a little bit more room to breathe. Yeah, that's looking good. As you can see here on the camera settings, I've set the focus object to be right at the laser front of Thinker, and that way it's just, even if I move Thinker around, the focus will stay right. I am quickly going to merge in Thinker from this project file over here. So this version of Thinker over here is the complete version of Thinker. Thank you, Edon, for delivering this to me. This is the final version of the supercomputer. Let's merge the project right here. I'm now gonna be copying the position data, and I'm gonna be turning on all these assets. Cool, I believe we have a perfect match. Let's do one more render and see what it looks like. Alright, the first thing I'm seeing is that our materials are not really behaving the way I want them to. That's either because they are unloaded or there's something else going on. Ah, here we go. Alright, I'm quickly going to be relinking some of these textures and then I'm getting back to you. Cool. So the first thing I'm seeing is that the reflectivity of the objects, they're basically taking way too much light. They're reflecting too much light. Now, what I could do here is, I see that I have glossiness there. I think maybe what I will try doing is I'm going to convert this scene to a Corona Renderer 7 object and then... Alright, we're back. So the thing that I've created right here is a darkness matte. Basically what I want to do is, because Thinker is made of such a reflective material, I want to use a kind of a V shape of just black drapes that I've added a compositing tag to, and then I've turned off seen by camera. That way we can utilize the beauty of CG and really move this V shape very close to the object or very far away from the object. That way we can still maintain the high glossiness value of the object itself while defining more exactly the way you want the shape to look. I'm getting an internal value error. That tube in the back, I would like to give it a different material that matches a bit more the vibe that we're going for. So I'm gonna be creating a new physical material inside of Corona Renderer. Then I'm gonna go to the base settings and set the base layer to be black. For the roughness, I would like to add a frosted plastic. So here's a really cool website called textures.com. Even for people who are not doing CG work, if you're just doing Photoshop work, it's a really cool website. There's HDRs over here, you have decals, you have PBR materials, you have a lot of stuff that you could kind of kit bash together into what you're looking for. So I'm looking for some kind of aluminum, I'm assuming. Alright, so this old aluminum over here has some of the details I want, and the fake gold paint is also pretty close to it. Then what I'm looking for is some kind of plastic that I could blend with that. So here you have machine paints, hammerite paint, maybe. Before I ever used Quixel Megascans, I used to be on this website a lot, and like the library is still, it's not the best, but it's like very reliable. Like for example, here you go, you have your nice bump texture, and it's just very simple and robust, and it just works. And here we go, we got a bunch of assets that we can use to make a new material. I could be doing this inside of Substance Painter, but I am actually gonna attempt doing it all inside of Corona Renderer 7. And I'm gonna be opening the Corona Node Material Editor. Here we go. So I'm gonna be dragging this material in, quickly rename it base. So this is gonna be what the material is essentially made of. So I'm gonna use this albedo over here of the aluminum. I'm gonna be applying the roughness to the aluminum. I'm gonna keep the IOR at 1.5. Usually I would work at 1.6, but I have heard that Corona Renderer 7 is slightly different in that. So let's give it a try. I'm gonna add the normal map inside of a Corona normal, which is inside of the bump channel. And then that should be basically it. There you go, I've changed the metalness to metal, and then on the displacement, let's put it to 0.2, and then I'm gonna be adding the height texture in there. That should be about it. Now you can play with the roughness, make it more rough, and this whole thing should brighten up, as it's gonna be catching more of the light reflections around it, and then it's gonna look brighter. If you lower the roughness, that means that it's less rough, more glossy. Well, in this case, it's gonna be a bit of a nice balance we're gonna have to find. Now I'm gonna be making a new physical material. Open that one up. Inside of the base layer, I'm gonna be adding the rubber grip albedo. Now I'm gonna be using the roughness of the gold paint, which I'm gonna increase a bit. I basically just want the movement inside of the image. As you can see, some areas are a bit more, and you can increase the contrast by controlling the black point and the white point over here. By moving them closer together, you have more contrast, as you can see here, and then you would have this kind of effect. I'm looking for somewhere there. Gonna drag this one in as well. And now finally I'm gonna create a layered material that I'm gonna drag over here, inputting the base over there and the finish in material 1. And now essentially what they're doing is they are averaging each other out. Like you could increase the amount and it would basically say how much of that material is dominant. You can literally just move this slider and play with that slider first to see if it gets you the result you want. If not, you can start playing with a mask or adding another material on top. So let's give this a save and let's give this a try. Alright, we're getting a not a number value error. I guess we're gonna have to figure that out then, because I'm not exactly sure what it means. Just to go over my camera settings, I have the shutter speed set to 50 and the f-stop set to 6.3, which were the settings we had noted on set. I have the tone mapping turned on to default, the white balance is also set to 6500. The bloom and glare are turned on, which I will play around with later a bit. Sharpening turned on, depth of field. We could use a bladed aperture with something like 8 blades, which I believe was what we had. For advanced bokeh effects, for this film itself, what we're kind of going for is the 0.5 anisotropy that's going to make the shape of the bokeh slightly more vertical. Alright, so apparently a NaN error basically means that some of the rays are not giving a correct response. This could be random, and because the rays are recalculated every time we hit render, it might work now, it might not work later. The material looks pretty cool, I'm enjoying the way this looks. I also am realizing that when I start to add the dark matte, I don't want to exclude really any of the bright highlights here. So we're probably going to be moving it around. I'm not sure if it fixed the problem, but if it did, hooray. Before continuing, I have a cable cluster inside of here that I would like to give the same material as the pure finish material. Now that we filled that up, I'm gonna be adding back in the dark mattes. And here you go. It's really all about contrast control, right? It's just know what the contrast is you're looking for, have some references, know what the general vibe is of your film. Oh, here we go. We have the NaN error again. It's actually quite interesting. So it is behaving based on the dark mattes. At least we know that. So I'm gonna be moving the dark mattes away a bit. Let's see if that changes anything. If you work with a cinematographer, you have someone to bounce these ideas off with and then kind of figure out what the exact style is that your film wants to be. And then you can find it in the process. Otherwise, I would say just really go at it yourself. Just when you're looking at references, I would personally suggest you take them in the context that they were in, right? Because it's very important to remember how specific details from a shot, if it's in the same genre as you, it had a place in time and why that decision was made that was right for that project. For example, in Syntactic Labyrinths, we're getting a lot of references from Yasujiro Ozu shot reverse shot coverage. Except for that, we have some contrast reference boards that basically me and Eric have decided on having a deep dark shadow plane, but then have a very soft fall off to give that feeling of a higher pristine technology that's floating in space. Those are the kind of the inner rules we discussed, and then we can kind of break them along the journey. But at least we know what it is we're looking for. At least we know when we are on style of the film or when we're branching off of it. Anyways, by moving the darkness matte a little bit away from the object, we managed to eliminate the glitchiness that was going on in there. So basically, probably, I have no idea what happened, but some of the bounce rays just got stuck in between that thing, I'm assuming, and couldn't get to the camera. This way I feel Thinker is looking pretty solid. I'm actually quite happy with it. I've quickly reset the focus plane of our camera. Alright, we're including the alpha channel. I'm gonna go for 30 passes. We're using this as a still. Denoise amount is fine. Camera post-processing, we don't need that. I am gonna be turning on the caustics, still frame, that's all cool. Now I'm gonna go to Corona multipass, enable the multipass, get the Z depth, make the max black be somewhere there, and make the minimum white be about here. Cool, now we have the front of Thinker all the way to the depth. I'm gonna go into shading and I'm turning on caustics and I want to apply denoising. And then I'm gonna go to bloom and glare and I'm gonna add that as well. So one thing you could do as well is add a light mix and a light select. The light mix would include any specific light. You could get the first light in the row that's creating the top light of Thinker. You could get that specifically selected. You can do apply denoising. And then with a light mix, you have that as a separate layer. And because you have footage, and your footage is not like 100% consistent when it comes to the light value, having a light mix could be a bit useful in that like tight compositing situation where you want it to look crispy but you don't have time to render all the shots. Basically, as long as you make sure that there is enough space for the rays to get back to your camera, you'll probably avoid the nan error. Here, as you can see, this is the real footage. Then we have our box over here with the rough dimensions of Thinker. We got some tracking markers over there. People do ask a lot about what is a good tracking marker. All of these are good tracking markers. So this small triangle, this plus, this bigger thing in total, all of them are good tracking markers. The idea of what tracking marker to put on your object, it depends on what your shot is going to be. For this case, we wanted to track the very tiny jitter that comes from the camera, so that's the only thing we want to apply onto our 3D model. If you're doing something that's moving more, it would be nice if you have one bigger shape that's more consistent. We have pre-composed all of this, and I have done a cleanup. The cleanup is very simple. I just opened it up in Photoshop and I just used the clone stamp brush. It's a pretty simple process, but I won't be covering it in this tutorial. I'll probably do a separate tutorial on it, on just how to color pick some values. The thing is, you don't really need to worry about this middle section because we're gonna be covering it up with our assets anyways. First, we have our beauty pass. There we go. Hey, I'm actually quite excited. That's looking pretty good. It's looking a lot better than the previous version. We have an alpha. Let's drag it in. The bloom can be set to add. There you have a lot of brightness, and now you can either turn down the opacity, but that does create like half opacity values in the middle. It works really nicely, but you know, it's a different effect than turning down the gamma. As you can see, that keeps the hot core a bit more. The cool thing is because you have this blooming layer on top, you can also go for a hue and saturation and then play with the saturation here. And you're basically still keeping the blue core in the middle, but you're changing the color of Thinker through the mechanic over here. I'm gonna keep it blue for now. Then we have a caustics pass, which I'm gonna put actually below the blooming glare, but first I'm gonna be adding a exposure effect. Here you go. Now you can really see where the caustics are supposed to be. And now you can clean this up a little bit with a dust and scratches effect. And then I'm gonna set that to add. Now I'm gonna be lowering the exposure here. Didn't have to increase the exposure at all. Usually you don't get to see it that much. Now we have a depth pass. I'm gonna add that on top. I'm gonna make a adjustment layer right in between. And I'm gonna add a blur camera lens blur. And now I'm gonna use the layer 14 that's on top as a blur map, which is this RLA pass itself. So here you go. I have inverted the blur map. That's, I believe, usually what you have to do in this case. And now, as you can see, we have a camera lens blur effect that's matching the blur distance, but it's definitely not matching the blur shape or the blur style. So we're first going to be lowering the blur a little bit to about 3, decreasing the aspect ratio to 0.5. There we go. That's already looking better. And I'm going to be increasing the roundness to 80%. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. We have a light pass. I'm going to be adding a color correction exposure to this. And I'm going to be basically lowering the gamma. There you go. And now we have excluded everything except for the top light. And then we can use a Luma mask from the footage to control that top light. Go to your project file over here and you can see that's pre-comp 1 and then duplicate it inside of your project window. Now you have pre-comp 3, which is essentially the same thing. I'm gonna change some of these composition settings. I'm gonna make it 1920 by 817, that's cool. Now I'm gonna move this area. I'm gonna pre-compose these layers again, and now I'm gonna scale it up until I only have this. Cool. Now I'm gonna be adding a blur. Here you go, fast box blur. That should be it. Here you go, value of 200. And now I'm gonna be adding a color correction curves. And I'm brightening it up until I have white. And now I'm just gonna be playing through the footage to see if we have any variation. I'm making a little bit of a bezier, and now you should be able to see some variation. We're looking for the most subtle thing. We're just looking for something that can affect our scene, but doesn't really feel forced or doesn't really feel like it's not supposed to be there, you know. I'm gonna drag in Precomp 3, put it right above, turn the track matte of our light mix onto the Luma matte setting. Here you go. And now I'm just gonna be rotating this. And there you go. So essentially now this layer has, throughout video, it has moments where it will peak and dip and it will have some variation. Now the next thing I would like to do is I would like to emphasize how this machine works a little bit. So I got this dust particle video from Action VFX, and I'm just gonna be compositing some of these particles right in front of Thinker. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm slightly gonna scale it up. Cool. And now I'm gonna be adding a exposure effect, bring down some of that gamma, get rid of most of this area over here, and then I'm gonna be increasing the exposure. I'm just gonna take the pen tool and draw a mask around this area. If we turn it back on, we should have a little black streak over there. And I'm gonna be increasing the feather to about 20, and then I'm turning that to add. Now I can increase the exposure a bit, and I can add a blur effect, camera lens blur, that's going right on top. Aspect ratio 0.5, roundness 80%, blur radius 2, maybe 2 is already too much. I'm actually gonna be expanding the mask a bit so we see a little bit more. That's a bit too much, but at least we can see it now. There you go. So this is basically what I'm trying to do. Decreasing the mask expansion to about 9. You can increase the highlight gain inside of the camera lens blur, and that would give you some of these more brighter affected ones. Now with the bottom layer of Thinker selected, I'm gonna go all the way up, including the white dust, and I'm gonna drag my pick whip all the way to my null object that I have that includes all the tracking data of the scene. Alright, so I feel like we can look at the final composite. Here you go. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, looks fine to me. Maybe the tubes in the back look a bit dark. Alright, that's actually pretty cool. It's been great to actually do this shot live for YouTube. So here you go, one more shot done for Syntactic Labyrinths. For the final compositing, I do have a tutorial on the YouTube channel on how I do my post-processing. I have a duplicate 3 times of the same layer in which I have split the RGB channel, for which I use a optics compensation effect that varies in intensity depending on what project I'm using. This is like a 4K composition, so a field of view of 6 makes sure that I'm not getting any extreme chromatic aberration. The only thing I really want to be doing is giving these shadows a hue shift so that when you observe it, it doesn't look like straight on full black. It's black with a fall off into a color into the next thing. Then there is a adjustment layer with a exposure effect and a gamma correction. The gamma correction on this one is just excluded for the core itself. As you can see, I can lower the exposure. And I've just lowered the exposure of Thinker. I've done the same thing for the background so I can control those individually and get the best contrast ratio I would like for the shot. Here we have a CC radial blur effect that I've put inside of an oval. That's just giving it a bit more of that foggy distortion that goes onto the surface of the lens. And then the next one is kind of more this rounded rectangle mask that you've seen me use before. And then it's set to subtract with the exposure, bringing down the gamma a little bit, vignetting our shot, giving us a bit more of a focal point here. Then we have the clean footage over here, and I would just like to add some grain on top. I'm gonna go for Cine Velveto, which is the one I've been using. I actually don't know where you can get these anymore. Yeah, I've been using these grain assets for a very long time. Grain assets are some of these things that you can keep using for your own project for so long. These are the film ones. I have some assets on the ArtStation store for Canon 60D ones and Sony A7S ones, and also I believe some iMac ones. Just some weird digital ones in case you need it for any kind of computerized effect. Now I'm basically just processing the film in some way, right? Just looking at how much contrast I would like to have. And I'm doing that through a curves effect on top of the grain. Here we go. Now I feel like we have all the values that I'm after. And the vibrance slider, I'm gonna try to control that a little bit as well. So that seems to be it. That's a finished shot for Syntactic Labyrinths. I'm gonna be doing the reverse shot of receiver, and then we're gonna be doing some exterior shots, and then we're gonna be doing the rest, and we're gonna have this movie out soon. So thank you very much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. That really helps me out, because then more people can get this knowledge, more people can check out our ArtStation store, and more people know about Blauw Films. Like this video, leave a comment below. I would love to hear about whatever you're doing. I would love to answer your questions, just have a chat. Just, be sure to comment below. And yeah, cool. Have a good night. Bye-bye.